And this is a great segue into how trauma shows up in our work itself. So we see it both in clients and we see it in our team members and staff. So one, if we're thinking about the clients that we serve, what we see, and I will just say kind of right from the beginning here that folks who have experienced trauma, who've come in to access services, can sometimes be those fond clients who want to do everything right and want to please everybody, but can oftentimes be the clients that are most difficult to engage. They might rise to anger or get activated easily. They might feel frustrated with services. They've accessed a lot of services and it hasn't worked out for them. So there's a lot of difficulty trusting staff and systems. And as providers, we come in with this desire. We come to this work for the right reasons. I mean, I doubt anybody came into this work for the money, right? These aren't systems where we're highly compensated. We do this because we feel a deep connection and to this work, and that this is something that's important to us, and these families are important to us. So these are clients that often come in mistrusting the system, and that can be frustrating for us as providers because we have good intentions, but we don't always know what their experiences are like coming to us. I did want to acknowledge, I see there's a great conversation in the chat. That's above and beyond what we can talk about today, but such important content and understanding in terms of autism, ADHD, and trauma. There's a lot of professionals who've been spending a lot of time in all of those areas trying to tease apart and understand how these are interconnected. So I just want to acknowledge, I see Megan, I see John, I see some great comments in there. So the other kind of ways that trauma can show up is strong emotional reactions. So this might be the clients that get angry, they might be passive aggressive, frustrated, they might be afraid. I don't know about you, but it can be really scary to access. I know I've recently accessed a couple new healthcare providers I've never accessed before, and I was nervous going to that first appointment, imagining what our families feel like showing up for these very first appointments. We also see kind of withdrawal. This nothing's helped before. This is helpless. This is hopeless. Why do I want to engage in this? And the thing that I think is so challenging about trauma work, whether you're a provider, whether you're a client seeking it out, is it really, those who've experienced it, you've developed a way of going about your world and your life in the way that works best for you, where maybe you're not triggered, where maybe this is not something that you have to think about. And when you access the services, it brings up all of those feelings. And it really is something that gets far worse before it gets better. And I don't think as providers, we acknowledge that enough. We think, but we're providing this great service. It's really important. It's really helpful. We know how beneficial it is. We know how important it is. And we want to make sure our families access these services. But the reality is it's really hard, and it often brings up a lot of emotions that can feel overwhelming and like they won't end. Now, I would say in my years and years of work with folks that is a temporary rise that then gets better and stabilizes. And I could say that if you engage 100% of the time, so I believe in the work, but it is absolutely terrifying when you're first engaging to have all these feelings come up. Feels like you're constantly uncovering things that you maybe put in a drawer and locked up and hoped would never come out again. So if we're talking about being trauma informed, the first thing I want everybody on this call to understand is come to it with grace and dignity on how hard it is to show up and to open up that drawer that has been locked, that folks have put aside. And if you take nothing else away, just that, just knowing what it takes for somebody to show up and that it will get harder before it gets easier, whether you're going to trauma-focused treatment or more broad trauma-informed care, because I think there's absolutely room for all of it. And these feelings can lead to this avoidance of services or sudden disengagement. So you imagine you go in going, I'm going to feel better, and then you get worse. You start to not get worse, but like the feelings start to come up because you open that drawer. You might get disengaged and not want to go anymore. We would often have folks, unless we explain this to them, which I think is why it's so important, and I'm explaining it to you now, folks get freaked out and they stop coming. They stop engaging in the services. And this is often why, on top of all of the tangible reasons why it can be hard for our families to engage in services. And we also see trouble concentrating, following through, or remembering details. So you remember I was talking about clients who maybe you explain to them what's happening next and they don't remember any of it. I would absolutely suggest that um, give it to them in lots of different ways and understand why they may not be holding all of the information, right? Their memory function, if it's a long-term exposure to trauma, their memory may not be working the way that ideally we would want it to, or they're just spending all their resources in just trying to survive right now. So it can be hard to take this additional work on. So our families show up and they're not easy, right? They show up with making us the enemy, being frustrated by services. This is normal. And I think why it's important for me that as staff members, as folks working in the system, that we manage and are aware of our own trauma experiences, is that our families can bring all of that up in us. You know, like everybody, I've had my own experiences and I've had clients that I dreaded because they've reminded me of something that was very painful and difficult for me. And so, really being able as to understand our own humanity and to welcome that in and to be curious. So in the same way you're curious about this training, to be curious about how maybe various clients are affecting you and why, and what that might be bringing up for you. So now there's other ways our trauma shows up in our work in terms of us, right? So I've already a little bit talked about this. One is compassion fatigue or secondary traumatic stress. So these are kind of different things. Compassion fatigue is your exhaustion from doing the work, a little different than burnout. Compassion fatigue is kind of the exhaustion from caring, whereas burnout is kind of being frustrated at the organizational level. And then secondary traumatic stress is when you keep hearing these trauma stories and you take them home and you have your own kind of trauma response where you're focusing and thinking about what this particular client has experienced. And it might be giving you nightmares. I've certainly had dreams about what my clients have experienced. There's burnout, which I alluded to, as well as moral distress, which is this kind of challenge of dealing with this the things that might be happening that doing things in your job that might conflict with your moral values, your moral compass, right? The conflict here. We also see conflict or miscommunication. So teams that are under a lot of stress probably may not be the best communicators with one another. They have frustration, they have lower engagement. And we also see this kind of numbing or over identifying with clients. And sometimes as providers, we have to be really careful about that to make sure that we're keeping that distance. And so when you want to maybe do more or connect more to clients, really questioning and looking at that in a little bit more detail. Now, at organizations, I've seen many of us work at what we would call trauma exposed organizations. This means that the work is specifically on trauma. And in these kinds of organizations, we see high staff turnover, we see rigid policies that may re-traumatize, right? So at this organizational level, maybe some ways in which we connect with clients, or they can be re-traumatizing as well. We see inconsistent communication and transparency, as well as difficulty sustaining morale and trust. So the key takeaway here is trauma doesn't just affect clients, it can shape interactions, teams, and entire organizations. Recognizing the signs helps us respond with compassion and care.